If you're an Android user searching for the perfect way to listen to your podcast as you head out to Camp Crystal Lake, check out the Podcast Republic app on the Google Play Store. There's thousands of good reviews, so you don't have to take my word for it. Check out the Podcast Republic app on the Google Play Store. Hey folks, this is a bit of an unusual episode situation we've got here. So what you're listening to right now is, we had a cool guest this week, Ted Geoghegan, a filmmaker. He offered to hang out with us for a little bit, and we said that sounds great, and we'll record an interview with you, and we'll splice it in as we go through the movie. Turns out we were having a really good time, and we talked for much longer than anticipated. So instead of doing that, which I think would turn this into like a 2.5 hour mega episode, be an interview with Ted about his sort of history with the Friday the 13th franchise, why he likes part 2 so much, and his pitch for a Friday sequel. So it's a really fun, cool interview. He was really super kind to spend so much time with us, and we had a blast talking to him.
When the mega powers explode.
I'm talking about the 80s. Oh, yeah.
Great Scott!
Cream of the crop. Oh, yeah.
Mega powers, yeah!
When this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're gonna see some serious shit.
Welcome to Dissecting the 80s. I am Trip Lano, one half of the Mega Podcasting Powers, and with me, as always, is my tag team partner, a man who knows that if a crazy old man approaches you on your way to vacation and tells you not to go, you should probably turn around. The Macho
Andrew Lano. And I do love Crazy Ralph. He's great.
He is a real treat. Joining us this week, very excited, filmmaker, great Twitter follow, master of all different things in the film world, is Mr. Ted Geoghegan.
Hey, how's it going?
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
I think I need to say thank you to the Twitter user who started talking to you about this movie originally. I have over here is at Hot Trash Boy, which is a phrase I never thought I'd say.
That was my nickname in college.
But Ted was recently talking about Friday the 13th Part 2 on Twitter, and I asked him to join us to talk about the movie, and he said yes. So thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Gonna just butter you up a little bit here. I saw your movie We Are Still Here a few years back, and this is a mildly amusing story to me, so hopefully you haven't heard it before, but the Sci-Fi Network ended up airing it like relatively recently after it was released. Do you know that? Okay. So I had watched it already. I think I had rented it, and then it was on Sci-Fi, so I was watching it for a second time. And not to spoil anything, but there's a sequence in the movie that is extremely bloody.
Towards the end.
There's like, yeah. But there's like, I don't know, there's some swearing in the movie. I if I recall correctly, it's been a little while, but you would know, right? There's some bad words in the movie?
A couple.
Okay, so on Sci-Fi, they bleeped out all of the cussing, but this end that is like just this bloody mess, they did not change. Not a frame was missing. And it was like, oh, yep, we do live in America.
Think of the children.
It's quite ridiculous. I mean, it's classic cable TV mentality, which is like, God forbid you say shit, but it's like you've got The Walking Dead on AMC with just people having like their intestines spray out their butthole, but like that's totally cool. Yeah, I found that delightful. I obviously I still remember it like 5 years later. But other movies of that movie is on Prime if you want to check it out. Both Andrew and I really enjoyed that. Another film of Ted's, Mohawk, is on Netflix right now, and Satanic Panic, which you wrote, is on Shudder. So if you're looking to see some of Ted's work, that's some places you can find it, and some stuff that I have seen. But let's talk about Friday the 13th Part 2. What's your Friday the 13th story? What's the first one you saw? Like, what was the environment that you saw it in? You're a little older than us, but I'm guessing you still missed theatrical on the original run of movies. I did miss theatrical on the Paramount 8, but so let's see. When I was a kid, I was not a big horror fan when I was younger. And I think I was about 13 years old. So it would have been like 91, 92-ish. And I I just didn't like horror, and it just wasn't my thing. I was like, why get scared when you can laugh? Like, watch comedies; they're way more fun. And
hey, I'm right there with you. I was the biggest giantess baby.
yep, yeah, and it was not for me, and I didn't understand like the predilection that brought people toward these things. And one of my best friends in the whole world, this guy Dave Romanesco, who I'm still very dear friends with, Dave showed up at my house for a sleepover. Like again, like 12, 13 years old. And he showed up. He was like, hey, I'm super excited to hang out. And he was like, hey, I brought along these movies. And he had brought along Friday the 13th Part 4, the final chapter. And I was like, nope, absolutely not going to watch it. And he was like, well, it's got Corey Feldman in it. You like Corey Feldman? And I was like, I do like Corey Feldman. He's pretty cool. And he was like, Dave goes, yeah. And the other thing is like, every time there's going to be a kill, like I'll pause it and I'll let you know. And he's like, you should watch it, but like, I won't let it scare you, because David'd seen the movie 100 times by then. It was
yeah.
A personal copy of the tape. And I was like, I don't really want to, but all right, Dave's super cool, and like I'll go along with this. And so it starts up, and like you get the first couple kills in the morgue with Axel and the nurse. And, he pauses it, and he's like, okay, this guy's about to get his head chopped off. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that. And then he unpauses it, and, Axel gets his head twisted around. And I'm kind of like, oh, that's uncomfortable. I don't really care for that. But at the same time, Dave's, like laughing hysterically, and he's telling me like, oh, Tom Savini did these effects, and like he did the effects for the first movie, and he came back for this one. He's like, yeah, that actor was just on a swivel, and they just like the body was fake, but the head was real, and they twisted. He's like explaining to me in like the most basic like kid terms. Like I'm sure,
yeah.
He's your pop-up video.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the way in which he described the effects actually being created were not accurate, but they were accurate enough for me to really like step back from the violence and start, like he would pause and be like, okay, this guy's about to blah, blah, blah. And before he'd even hit play, I'd be like, I wonder how they're going to do that. Cause I knew it wasn't real, but it was like,
right.
Like what? This guy's going to get like, a meat cleaver to his face. And I'm like, well, how are they going to do that? And then we'd see it, and then I'd be like, "How did they do that? Like, obviously that guy didn't get killed. That's Marty McFly's dad.
I was going to say that's the one with Crispin Glover, right?
Yeah. And he's the one who gets the corkscrew to the hand, followed by Teddy to the face.
Ted, where's
that's
the
my
corkscrew?
that's my favorite one in all of Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
Well, that's when you said in your email you want to talk about Ted because you're a Ted. I was like, wait, I thought we already did the Ted one.
There's
yeah.
Ted.
I didn't realize there were two Teds.
Weirdly, Friday the 13th gets two Teds. Yep.
It's a two Ted franchise.
Yep. A name that is not regularly used in anything gets two Friday the 13th Teds. But so we finished the movie, and Dave was like, "What did you think?" And I was like, "It was actually kind of cool. Like I liked that." And he was like, "Good, because I brought along 5 and 6." And so that night, my first introduction to not just Friday the 13th, but to horror was the Tommy Jarvis trilogy of 4, 5, and 6. So that was
okay.
Really fun to like dig into those. And I mean, I was an addict immediately. Like he went home the next day, and I like told my parents, like, "Can we go to the video store?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure." And we went to the video store, and I rented 1, 2, and 3 like right away. And my parents were like, "Oh, like I don't know if you're going to be okay with those." And I was like, "Oh, it's totally cool. It's totally cool." And like I popped them all in. I admittedly watched them in like the afternoon just in case I got scared.
Yeah,
sure, yeah.
But I watched 1, 2, and 3 the next day. Brought them back. Like had to watch, like 7, 8, and 9. And no, I guess only 7 and 8 by that point. Yeah, so it just would have been all the Paramounts. And then I just dove into everything else. I was calling Dave every day, being, "What else should I watch? What else should I watch?" And it was like all the Halloweens, all the nightmares, like. And I became a complete obsessive to the point where I lived in a small town in rural Montana, but we had a lot of video stores, and I went to every single video store and rented every single tape, literally every single tape. And it's why I became, I think it's why I'm such a horror trivia geek now, and I know so much about this stuff now, is because, you know, my contemporaries, people my age, you know, people in their early 40s, or, you know, I'll see them on Twitter being like, I'm finally going to watch Tenebrae. I'm finally going to watch, you know, like, you know, Friday the 13th part 6. And I'm just like, how did you not watch this movie 500 times in your because I did. And it just, you know, it obviously comes down to me just being a lonely, weird kid in rural Montana. And, you know, these movies quickly became my best friends. But
yeah.
You know, now it's my whole life. You know, I mean, I am an ambassador for horror movies. You know, I've got a Jason tattoo on my arm as well as a lot of other things, but it's less about, you know, going like, yay, horror. And it's more about, you know, reiterating that these movies are my life. They are absolutely my life. And I would be dead without horror movies. They have become my best friends. They have become my therapists. They are mom's comfort food. They are all the important things in my life, you know?
I love that.
And I mean, early last year, my father passed away, and I was, you know, obviously heartbroken by this. And, you know, I hadn't seen him in a few months. You know, he still lived in rural Montana. And that night I came home and, you know, I told my partner, I was like, you know, I was just a wreck of a person. You know, just this total shell. And she was like, whatever you need, like, you know, we'll get it for you. And I was like, you know, like, I want some food. I want a beer. I kind of want to just like sink into the couch and just, you know, like be with my thoughts and everything. And my partner was like, yeah, you know, like totally. But like, you know, if you want to watch TV, if you want to go out, like whatever you want, like, you know, here for you. And the first thing that popped into my head was like, I want to watch Friday the 13th. And I remember her going like, you know, do you really want to watch that? You know, like, you know, it's violent and, you know, dark and, you know, like you're in kind of a rough place. And I was like, honestly, like nothing makes me feel more like swaddled than watching the Friday the 13th movies. Like to me, they really are like mom's meatloaf. Like they've become such a part of my life that they are my childhood. And like every time I pop one of them on, I do get that feeling of like sitting downstairs in my parents' basement watching part 4 for the first time with Dave Romanesco, you know, when I was 12 years old. Like that they're no longer, they never were scary. You know, they were always just this like unifier for me. And so to this day, I mean, it's why I was so happy to hop on this chat with you guys and talk about them. But like the Friday movies to me, they are the most important 8 films in my entire life, and they always will be. Like, are they the best? No, but like, are they the most important? Hell yes. Like undeniably forever, they are the most important to me.
That's really awesome. That's
Yeah, I
a
love
very
that.
cool story. Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. We have often talked about Friday versus Nightmare versus Halloween and such, and I think the conclusion we always end up coming to is the Friday the 13th movies don't have the highest highs, but the lows aren't quite as low. It's like the most consistent across movie to movie. Like they all hover in the C+ to B+ region,
Right.
whereas like Halloween, you've got an A and like maybe an F in there,
Yeah.
but you know they kind of stay in the same wavelength. And I was thinking about that last night as I was watching this because it had been a while since I had seen it, and I was thinking like I hadn't watched this one in a while, and I was like, oh man, I really enjoyed this one a lot more than I remembered. I always say the final chapter is my personal favorite of the Friday movies, but this one is a lot of fun too. So yeah, no, that's really awesome. I guess I was good. Normally we ask people between the 3 franchises which is their favorite, but I think it's overwhelmingly obvious this is yours.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's I really enjoy all of them. You know, every Friday the 13th on Twitter, you start seeing the people who like decide to rank all of them. And I'm
Sure, yeah.
like, I don't feel a need to rank them. Like I love 2. I love the original film. Because, you know, I knew Betsy Palmer when she was alive, and you know, I'm still good friends with Adrienne King, who's the final girl in that film. So like, of course I've got like a connection to that. And like the 3D stuff in 3 is so much fun. And, you know, Jason getting his mask in that one's really great. And Richard Brooker as Jason in 3 is really great. And 4 is awesome because that's the one where Jason finally dies, you know, like, and 5 is like this trashy, crazy thing that's like, you know, it's like a porn director made it. And it's like, it's so like I love that. Like I love what like a janky weird movie that is. And then like 6 arguably is possibly my least favorite of the Paramount 8, which is crazy because most people it's their favorite. And I still love it. I mean, it's like picking my favorite of 8 things or my favorite or least favorite of 8 things I adore. But 6 is when it's like Jason comes back. Now he's a zombie. Now he has superhuman strength. But like that's the one where they kind of started like winking at the audience. It's the one that has the James Bond intro. It's got the Alice.
Oh yeah.
Like it's the one where Jason decapitates 3 people at once with a machete. It's the one where the kids look right into the camera and say, "What did you wish you were going to be when you grew up?" Like it has a certain sort of waka waka to it that I personally am not as big a fan of as a straight-faced slasher film, but I see why people enjoy it because it does, it does break the wall a bit. It does have a bit more fun with the series, but I thought the 5 before it were fun. So, and I was fine. And then it's like 7 is Jason versus Carrie, and part 8 is like Jason killing people on a boat and a little bit in Vancouver, British Columbia.
Yeah, that we did that one a while back, and man, is it such a disappointment that you don't get the thing that is on the tin. It's like, Jason in Manhattan is such a wonderful idea, and they didn't do anything with it. It is such a disappointment to both of us.
2 nights, you get Kane Hodder standing in Times Square for a couple minutes, but
yeah.
But I still love it. I still find the movie so like cheerfully enjoyable. It's like, I mean, Kelly Hu's in it, like Miss America, who ended up being in The Scorpion King. Like it's like this crazy bunch of people, and it's like, and at the end of the day, it's like it's still Jason on a boat. It's still Jason. He's still
sure.
He's still chopping people up, and there's still a bunch of blood and a bunch of boobs. Like,
plus there's a radioactive waste in that one, which is a new thing for the franchise.
Yeah, because
that's the one that like is that the first one? Because that's the one where she gets the woman gets injected with like heroin or something.
Yes. And then
it was like, wait a minute. I remember seeing that and being like, that feels like so. What happened here?
Yeah, they inject her with heroin and then try to steal her away, presumably to like assault her. Her friends save her, and then like 3 minutes later, like there's like a cartoony shot of her like slapping herself on the cheeks and being like,
"Yes,
ooh, okay, I'm better.
Yes, not high on heroin anymore.
I'm good now."
Yeah.
Jason actually saves her. I remember that detail. As you were saying it. It's like
he stabs the guy while he's on top of her.
Yeah. He impales him on his own heroin needle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jason, my anti-drug.
Yep.
Yes.
God bless.
So part of the reason that the reason we invited you here is because you were saying how much part 2 is your favorite. Do you mind elaborating a little bit on what makes this one your personal favorite?
Absolutely. So, after the success of the first Friday the 13th, they quickly dove into production on a second film. And a lot of the times when that happens, I feel like the second film or whatever sequel, it feels rushed. And Friday 2 just is a film that does not feel rushed. It feels very methodical. It feels very well thought out. It has really good, solid characters that I think are just as charming, if not more so, than the team in the original film. It has that very strange introduction featuring Alice, the survivor from the first film, being killed by Jason after finding, Pamela's head in her refrigerator. That sequence.
Yeah.
And that sequence, was created because Adrian King was contractually obligated to be in the second film, but had been dealing with a stalker and did not want to be in the film. And ultimately, she had to be in the movie, and the decision was made. She was like, "Well, if I have to be in this movie, you're just going to kill me off right away. I'm going to do like one day on set and just shoot this thing and get the hell out of here because I'm, terrified for my life." And it's a really bold choice, to kill off your final girl. I mean, not knowing, the history behind that, for audiences, to just have Alice, just be offed immediately there, I think is such a bold creative choice. And then not only that, but then the film jumps forward 5 years. And suddenly, we're at the camp on the other side of the lake. We're meeting all these wonderful new characters. It's like Ginny, the lead character in that, played by Amy Steele, is absolutely wonderful. And it is the introduction to Jason. We finally get to see Jason, and he is this hulking, insane behemoth of a woodsman who we didn't realize had not drowned in that lake back in the 1950s, but rather pulled himself to the shore, lost his mind, and ended up building a crazy, I don't know what you want to call it, a fort,
Fort is I think that's
fort.
the operative word. It's a fort, yeah.
Right? I mean,
It's the kind of thing a bunch of kids would build, like the Goonies would build.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And it's like, and one has to consider the fact that like Jason is this mentally disabled child, and he's like alone in the woods at like age 9. It's like, yes, he's building this crazy fort, and he as he grows up, suddenly, it's 20 some years later, and we've got this 30-some-year-old man with the mind of a child, and like continually losing his mind out in the woods. I think that's such a rad concept for a for a slasher villain, and to tie it so perfectly into the first film, I think is such a joy, because in the first film we're just led to believe that Jason was a young boy. He drowned in the lake, and his mother, went out for vengeance. But the second film kind of takes that concept and flips it on its head, and turns this sweet little boy into a maniacal killer who racks up a body count by the end of the series well into the 130s, I believe. It's
Mm-hmm.
So it all starts with part 2, and I mean, part 2 is it owes a lot to Italian giallos. It takes a lot of its kills from A Bay of Blood, an Italian film from the 70s. Including very famously the impalement while the couple's having sex. It's very, very much indebted to a lot of Italian cinema, and as a fan of Italian stuff, I can read that throughout the entire film. It really does have a Bay of Blood vibe to it, and it's pretty scary. It actually has some good scary moments, and honestly, I believe out of the whole Paramount 8. It's by far the scariest. Jason, Sackhead Jason. He's not like a novelty character at this point. He's just this horrible, creepy thing, and he's wearing this sack over his head. He's creeping around. I love the sequence when Ginny returns back to the camp after going out to the bar, and she and Paul are in the cabin, and there's this moment where she goes, "There's someone in this room, Paul," and lightning strikes, and you can just see Jason standing in the corner motionless for one split second, and then she goes, "There's someone in this room," and all of a sudden he jumps out of the darkness, and it's such a good yes, I eat that stuff up. It's so charming, and not only that, but it's got some great jump scares. I mean, including the final bit at the end when Jason jumps through the window. It absolutely puts little Jason jumping out of the lake in the first movie to shame. It slays that jump scare so well that I absolutely think it's the best of all the dream jump scares at the end of the Friday films, which most Friday films end with a dream jump scare. But that one's just, I mean, by far the best. The way they frame it, the way they play against the music, and the way they cut to him jumping through the window. It's a cut that shouldn't be right, but it's perfect.
I've seen this movie a jillion times, and last night watching it, like, I know that is coming, and I'm a jumpy person. Anyone who listens to this show has heard many times I'm a big jumper. I am easily startled. That is how I would describe myself. And it's like, I know that one's coming, and I still like almost spilled my water all over myself last night at 1 a.m. It was like, damn it, come on, man.
Yeah.
Well, I watched it last night too, and I'm currently pet sitting, and my friend and they have a pool, and I was like, oh, maybe we'll take like a night swim because it's been super hot out lately. And I watched Friday the 13th, and my boyfriend fell asleep on the couch, and I was like, I'll still go out for a night swim, and like turned on the step lights and like walked back there, and I was like, you know what? I don't think I'm gonna do this. I think I'm going back in the house.
I'm good.
You mentioned the edit there, and the editing is actually one of the things that really struck me upon rewatching this. This is Susan Cunningham in her first stab at a solo editing credit. I think she'd been assistant editor on a couple of movies, perhaps even the first Friday. I don't have her IMDb in front of me, but there are a bunch of really cool edits, but several of them that I would highlight going through this almost reminded me of the movie Hot Fuzz in their like comedic jumping. So there's one with the dog Muffins where we cut from the dog and you think the dog is about to get it, and it's just from the dog to hot dogs on the grill.
Yep.
Which is it's just like that's a Hot Fuzz edit. And then the other one in that same vein is I believe it's Amy Steele who screams, but that might not be right. But there's a scream and we cut from the scream to like a guitar solo wailing at the bar, like catching up with everybody else. And it was one of those like, oh man, that's like a really good joke edit that I've, not something I see talked about in these movies a lot, but surprisingly deft hand from somebody who didn't do a lot of editing beyond this movie and hadn't really done a solo movie. There's a bunch of really interesting stuff that she does in the edit bay that makes this movie more entertaining than I think it would be in someone else's hands.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that Muffin gets it right there. I think that's our cue that Muffin does not make it through that moment. Also,
I thought Muffin shows up at the end, doesn't she?
They definitely have the test audience thing where Muffin reappears at the end of the movie. I think.
Here's my thought on that.
Oh,
there's a moment in the film where they believe they find the remains of Muffin.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's Muffin totally got killed, and Muffin shows up at the end of the film to reiterate that what you're watching is a dream sequence because.
Oh, interesting.
Ginny does not know that Muffin is dead. So when the door opens, she goes, "Oh, Muffin. Muffin's dead." And so when Jason bursts through that window behind her, that's further proof that this is in fact a dream. Also,
I never thought about that. I like that.
It's a dream because Jason does not look like that. Jason never had hair. Jason is bald. Jason does not have a beard. And yet, in Ginny's dream of Jason as this woodsman, as this this horrible monster that lives out there, he's this giant hairy beast of a like proto caveman sort of thing.
So where do you think the dream sequence starts? Because this is a really interesting take to me, because she does unmask Jason, so presumably she knows what his head looks like.
She does, and I think that's one of those moments where it's like I guess we kind of have to retcon that a bit.
Okay.
I was actually just about to chime in with yes, she.
Sorry.
No, please. I'm glad you brought it up. You've done the research as well. No, she does unmask Jason. So yes, in theory, she would know what he looks like, but. If you factor in that parts, I mean, and obviously, they didn't have this planned, when they were shooting part 2, but in part 3, we get a very clear image of what Jason looks like. Not only that, but Jason's wearing the hockey mask for the vast majority of the film, and we clearly see that he is bald and has no beard.
Right.
And part 3 takes place the next day. It literally takes place a day after part 2, and part 4, in which we also see Jason unmasked when he's killed. We also see that he's bald and has no beard, and that film takes place 2 days after part 3. So parts 2, 3, and 4 all take place within the span of a week. Jason's initial rampage after coming back for revenge all takes place over the course of a week, and then he's killed.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that you brought up the dream thing with regard to the end of the movies, because I frankly hadn't put together the dream sequence, that it was dream sequence here, although that does make sense. I was making notes about how obviously we saw that dog eviscerated earlier in the movie, and I was like, this must be a test audience thing. So
Yeah.
the dream sequence does make a lot of sense there.
When you consider the fact that the first one ends with that really big, bold dream sequence, the second
Right.
thing. The third one features the bit where, Jason's in the window and she freaks out, and then Mama Voorhees jumps out of the water and attacks her.
Right.
Yeah.
So that one ends with a dream sequence, and then it's like part 4 does not end with a dream sequence, but part 5 has the bit where Tommy Jarvis becomes Jason at the end of that movie. The girl comes in to visit him at the end of part 5 in the hospital bed, and she's like, hey Tommy, what's going on? And all of a sudden Tommy is Jason and he has a knife, which obviously did not happen. That's a dream.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's like part 6, no dream, we're good there. Part 7, I believe, has a dream sequence at the end of it. No, it doesn't. It does not. But then 8 obviously does, because in playing up the fact that, our final girls constantly are having visions in the Friday films, Rennie, the final girl in part 8, is throughout the entire film seeing baby Jason. She sees baby Jason in a mirror. She sees baby Jason through a portcullis and all this. And then at the end of the film, when Jason is finally covered up in toxic waste and we see his face melting away, instead of seeing like the gruesome remains of Jason, which is theoretically the gigantic hulking beast that we're introduced to in Jason Goes to Hell, she sees a little boy. So that moment of like seeing little Jason laying down there under her feet, again, I have to chalk that up as a dream sequence. There's no way that the toxic waste turned Jason into a little boy. What she saw was the little boy that she saw throughout the entire film. And it also leads into the fact that the vast majority of the Friday films end with a dream sequence. So
yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So, yeah, you have laid out a great case there, one that I had not personally put together on my own before. So that I appreciate that. Frankly, you've illuminated me for sure.
So in terms of horror movie dream sequence jump scare endings, if you like stack up, I had written down Carrie versus original Friday the 13th, and then I also had original Nightmare, and I was like, that one's so hilarious.
Yeah.
So that's probably not really in the running. Like the Carrie versus Friday the 13th, which one do you think is like which one's your favorite?
I still got to go with Friday. But honestly, I'd go with Friday too. That being my favorite jump scare of all of them. I do think the little Jason popping out of the lake in the first film. Ari Lehman playing little Jason there. I think that it's a phenomenal scare, and it famously is. The story goes that it's what sold the movie. That buyers were in the room and they were like, this is pretty good. This is pretty good. And that final scare happens, and like everybody just communally shit their pants, and suddenly there was a bidding war for the movie, and so like, I mean, kudos to them for that.
Oh yeah.
The jump scare at the end of Carrie is phenomenal. And, one of my dearest friends from childhood, this pal of mine, David Heisel, David was always like, yeah, I love horror movies. He was like, boy, the end of Carrie always gets me. It always gets me. And I said, oh, I've never seen Carrie before. This was, when I was, 14, 15 years old, still going through the library of horror films. And I rented Carrie, and I said, do you want to watch it? And David was like, yeah, I'll totally watch it with you. And I actually remember this so well. And I remember sitting there and that scare happening. And David, who'd seen the movie like a dozen times, just like jumps out of his skin for like the 10th time. So I was like, man, there really is something to that scare. Like that is a good scare when he's seen it this many times and it's still just absolutely knocking him on his ass.
One of the recurring gags we have on the show, well, not a recurring gag on the show, it's a recurring gag in our real life, is our mom basically has Memento, but only regarding movies. Like, it's the second that it's over, it like is wiped clean. So she's seen Jaws 5,700 times. Like, it's our family's 4th of July movie. She saw it, I believe she saw it in theaters. But every time Bruce pops out of the water, she like shrieks. And so it's just exactly the same thing. It's like, I'm almost jealous of her ability to like have those moments for the first time every time, because it's a better way to enjoy things. But I'm like, oh, here comes the bit that I like. And instead she's like, Ben Gardner's head pops and she's like, some of them are just that good that they just last. Carrie, I jump every time too. So I get it with your buddy there.
I love it.
Yeah. We'll hop around a little bit just to make sure we get to hit all the topics. But sure. One of my favorite things about the Friday the 13th franchise, which I think it sets it apart a little bit, is that almost all of them give you what we have dubbed the previously on the Jason movies thing, where they take some time to be like, you may not have seen what got us here, so let's fill it out. And this movie, actually, I think they just lift the whole campfire sequence and drop it into part 4 to give you that, like, what it is. But you when we were talking about this on Twitter a little bit, we're going into part of the reason you like this one so much is because it's fills out the backstory. So I thought it'd be good to talk about that a little bit, of how we get to the theory that we were talking about online of Jason is alive for the first 4 and then he's the sort of unkillable monster, which I think is probably the correct reading of the series, but one that maybe gets lost in the shuffle as you're watching this sort of shambling monster. Well,
as is said around the campfire, I'm going to give it to you straight about Jason.
I'll edit in some campfire crackling under this part for you. A little Foley.
Over the course of the campfire sequence, as well as the sequence in which Ginny rather drunkenly explains what she thinks happened when they're out at the bar with her and Paul and Ted around the bar, I see no other reading of it other than what the characters in part 2 claim. Like, clearly the intention was not for Jason to be a supernatural killer when part 2 was made.
Yeah.
Jason in that film, he clearly is what the characters say he is, which is that he was a child who had mental deficiencies and needed to be cared after by his mother, and went for a swim in the lake while the counselors were making love. He drowned in the lake and they never found his body, but he clearly pulled himself from the lake. He pulled himself from the other side of the lake. So clearly he was able to make it to shore, but he didn't make it to shore anywhere where his mother or the counselors at Camp Crystal Lake could have found him. We know this because the camp in part 2 is repeatedly described as being on the other side of the lake. Jason pulled himself from the lake and created this little, as I mentioned, this fort. He was a kid. He was scared. He was alone. And so he tried to just kind of make a way for himself. And for 20 some years, he lived in the woods and he became this sort of boogeyman character who was just out there. Like, people knew he was out there, as we find out in other films. In part 3, Chris, the final girl, talks about years prior when she was out at the lake and this strange man accosted her. And then later we find out that it was Jason. That film takes place the next day, which means that Jason was out there, like, creeping on people and being this awkward, hulking brute for years and years. And he's drawn to the sounds of a scuffle by the edge of the lake at the end of part 1, just as Ginny describes it. And so he's this odd loner. He's this strange mountain man. And one night he hears screaming, he hears shouting, and so he walks around the lake. And just as he reaches what he thinks is the sound, he sees his mother. He sees Pamela for the first time in 20 years. He's like, wow, it's my mom. And in that moment, his mom is brutally decapitated by a camp counselor. And she wanders out, she gets in the raft, and she floats out into the lake. Meanwhile, Jason is just completely confounded by this. Clearly, he goes over there and he takes his mother's head. He takes her head. We know this for two reasons. One, however long later it is, we find that Jason has brought his mother's head to Alice's cabin and placed it in her refrigerator. And then later in the film, 5 years later, when part 2 takes place, we see that he still has his mother's head, which is now mummified and sitting on this altar in this, little fort that he made for himself.
And he took her sweater.
He did. He also took her sweater. And if you look closely at that altar, you'll also see that 5 years later, Alice's corpse is laying at the foot of the altar. It's all desiccated and dried out, but you can tell that it's Alice because the ice pick is still stuck in the side of her head.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
Right.
Yeah, it's a cool little in joke, if you will.
Yeah.
Little moment. But
I always imagine Jason having like a bowling ball bag and he's just like toting around Pamela's head. Yeah, it's like I just have this image in my head of like Jason, instead of wearing his coveralls, is like in a bowling shirt, just like strolling through the woods with this bowling ball bag.
Don't mind me.
Yeah, he's like whistling.
Yep. Well, and for me, the idea that Jason, because there's a lot of people who argue that like, no, Jason was a little kid and then, suddenly becomes this just hulking beast of vengeance. He's arguably like a ghost of vengeance. Kind of similar to the concept that is Victor Crowley in the Hatchet films.
Sure, yeah.
Victor Crowley is, like he's a corporeal ghost. He's a solid ghost. He's like the Dagmars in We Are Still Here. He's like a solid ghost who can actually touch people and hurt them. But that's not what Jason is. Jason is a full-grown man who has lost his mind after seeing his mother be decapitated and goes on a week-long killing spree. We see this in the fact that when Jason goes to kill several characters in part 2, we see his hands, and we see he's got a big fat raspberry on one of his thumbs. From like when you hit your thumb with a hammer and it leaves.
Yeah.
That I'm sorry, Ghosts of Vengeance don't get those. Not only that, but in part 2, Jason repeatedly gets injured, and when he gets injured, we hear him cry out in pain. He gets his leg cut and he screams and grabs his leg as the blood comes out of it. Like, there's a moment where someone jumps out and kicks him in the balls, and he grabs his crotch and falls to the ground, like groaning.
Right, yeah.
Like, he's clearly a man. He's clearly a living human being. And at the end of that film, he gets chopped really violently in the shoulder. And yes, I mean, we do have to argue that, like, that would theoretically be a fatal blow to any normal human. But he's so jacked up on crazy that the fact that, he's kind of had his shoulder blade bisected is a really, really painful, but like, I'm going to get through this. So at the end of part 2, yes, he does get chopped really violently in the shoulder. And then at the beginning of part 3, we see Jason pulling himself away before the authorities can show up. And then at the end of part 3, Jason gets chopped in the head with an axe, arguably, again, something that should really, really kill
yes.
the average person.
The shoulder I'll give you on the theory you're spinning here, but I feel like axe to the head is fatal for everyone.
So, but here's my theory on this, because I really do love these movies, and I don't want to make excuses for them, but I do want them to work. And the thing is, it's not that he gets like his head bisected or anything. He gets chopped above his left eye with an axe, and he gets chopped in such a way that the axe is protruding from his head, which really means that it goes through the skull, and it likely causes some brain damage to the frontal lobe. But it does not go like deep into his head. Even when he turns, we see the axe isn't actually that deep in his head. And in history, people have been hit in the head with axes and lived. Like it's
Sure.
It is absolutely something someone can live through. And given the fact that Jason, again, is crazy high on endorphins, he's losing his mind, and he's also just this hulking behemoth of a man that, you know what? Shoulder injury, axe to the head, like there's a universe in which a hulking sociopath could theoretically live through these two things. Not live well, but could live through these two things. And the axe to the head is actually so traumatic that they believe he's dead, and they take him to a morgue, at which point the endorphins kick back in, and he gets up, and he's like, nope, I'm not done killing people.
I'm imagining a like Phineas Gage-esque turn for Jason, where like after the head injury, he like suddenly becomes a very kind man and like gets a job at like a
Trader Joe's.
Yeah. He's just like a very kindly bag clerk who's helping people with their groceries. Yeah,
but it is.
I'll give you that. You do make a strong argument here. I'm smiling watching it because these are my favorite kinds of movie discussions. So
and then really like because we have to do the deep dive to finish this statement in part 4. Part 4 is called The Final Chapter. It's the movie where Jason dies. It's Jason's final time living. It is the end of Jason. And it is a film about Jason's death. And that film ends with Tommy Jarvis, a survivor of all this trauma, violently murdering Jason to the point where Jason is not coming back from it. Because he first attacks Jason and hits him a few times. He hits him in the face. There's the really brutal moment where, Jason slides down the machete with, his eye and mouth still, quivering. But then we see Jason's hand tremble a little. And there's this incredibly violent moment where Tommy just gets on top of him and just butchers him. Like, absolutely butchers him, while his sister looks on in horror, realizing that Tommy is theoretically the new Jason, So Jason is dead. He's dead, capital D, dead at the end of part 4. He is killed. Part 5, we get Roy Burns, killing people. Jason is dead. And it's in part 6, a movie that's title is called Jason Lives, where Jason comes back. These titles, they're not there by mistake. These are very specific titles. Jason Lives is called that because it's the movie where Jason lives. It's literally Victor Frankenstein with the electricity screaming, "It's alive! It's alive!"
Right.
Yeah.
Jason lives in this one through a bolt of electricity. Anyone arguing that isn't when Jason comes back from the dead, I got nothing for you. That is the moment in which Jason goes from being a living serial killer to an undead killing machine. He gets out of his grave, and the first thing he does is he punches a man, and his hand goes right through the man. Later in the film, when he reaches for a guy's machete, there's a character who's wandering through the woods with a machete. Jason grabs the man by the hand and swings him so hard that the man's arm rips from his body as the man flies through the woods into a tree. And Jason, holding the man's severed arm, which is still holding the machete, looks at it. And even through the mask, there is the realization that Jason is looking at this and going, holy shit, I am really strong. You can
Is that the smiley face moment?
Yes, that's the smiley face moment, which is so absurd. I don't even understand, what, I feel like they found that on a tree in the woods and they
definitely
funny. But yes, but that moment, it's like Jason is coming to grips with the fact that he is incredibly strong. And why isn't Jason punching through people or bending people in half, or in the first 3 films that he's in? Because he's a human, and he is bound by human strength and human killing techniques. So, boom, that's what's up. And I accept no arguments. You hear me crack that cold one?
I did, yeah. I was like, that was a delightfully emphatic crack there. You certainly don't have to answer this question because unlike us, who are people that are never going to get asked to do this, there is a world in which maybe you do get asked to do this. But obviously, Jason's rights are mired in some sort of nightmare scenario right now, and
yes,
we're a long way from getting to see another one of these. But do you have your elevator pitch for your Jason movie, and would you share it? And if you don't want to, I'll just cut this whole thing. That's totally
absolutely.
fine.
I'm so happy to.
Okay.
I don't believe that slasher films work after the mid 90s, and I don't mean just them like as movies. I mean that the era has changed. I think that the mindset has changed. And to me, slasher films really are the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. And a lot of people will argue, the slasher was dead by 84, but I think there's still a lot of fun slashers that came out well into, like I said, 93-ish.
Totally.
But my thought is, if you're going to do Jason, like as much as I enjoyed parts of the reboot, I think Derek Mears is a fucking phenomenal Jason in a film that didn't deserve his great performance as Jason.
I think that's the most. That's the remake of the classic horror, of the 70s, 80s that I like the most.
Yeah, and the thing is, I do like things about it. I think it's shot really beautifully. I think the movie looks gorgeous. Crystal Lake has never looked like as cool a place as it does in that movie. But I have my biggest issue, and I'll hop. See, this is how I go. I told you I have the gift of gab. I'll say this, and then I'll dive right back in. My biggest issue is the movie's too cruel.
It's extremely cruel. That's a good way to put it.
I don't like how torturous. I don't like how torturous the movie is, and I don't like how torturous Jason is. One of my favorite things about slasher films, and the reason that I do consider them like Mom's Meatloaf, is because they are very rarely torturous. And when when a slasher film is mean, it becomes infamous for its meanness. Like a film like The Prowler that features that sequence where a guy gets stabbed through the top of his head and lives through it while his eyes turn opaque white as he screams. Like, ugh, that's mean shit, Like,
yes.
In slasher films, no, that's not how it works. Like in a slasher film, you get stabbed in the kneecap and you drop dead. That's how a slasher film works. Like
it's like an old Western where anytime you get shot, you just go ugh in the gut and fall.
Mild electrocution, drop dead, stab.
One hit kill in GoldenEye, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, for me, one of my biggest issues with the new Friday is all of the kills in it feel really mean, even when they're not that torturous. Like the bit where the girl's under the dock and
yes.
Oh yeah.
You know what? Fun kill, but really mean. Dude on the speedboat who gets the crossbow bolt to the head still feels pretty mean. Like dude who's in the hydroponics lab gets straight up tortured.
Right.
And to me, it's like that's not really a Friday to me. And it's not really a slasher film to me. Slasher films are a little more carefree and they're a little more fun. So while
I also think it was a huge mistake to cast the sort of antagonist or protagonist against Jason in Jared Padalecki, who is a giant human being. Like Jason is supposed to be huge and make the other people look small, and they cast this like 6 foot whatever Jared Padalecki, who's like this hulking dude, and it becomes a more even looking matchup, which I think is just totally the incorrect way to go. Agreed. And I like him. I enjoy Supernatural. I watched it way past when most people jumped off that boat. And the other thing is, I really do believe in the Beauty and the Beast scenario. I think that final girls are an integral part of slasher films. I think especially if your killer is going to be a giant brute male. Sure. Yeah.
I think it's important. I think it's empowering. I think it's fun. And I think that film deserved a final girl. I think it deserved a warrior woman fighting off Jason in that. And again, I like Padalecki a lot too. I'd be honored to work with someone like him. I think he's a great talent. But and just like the Tommy Jarvis trilogy, in all those films, it's like, yes, Tommy Jarvis is like the final boy in all three of them. But in all three of those films, he's partnered with an incredibly strong woman who survives all three of those films. And in most cases, he wouldn't have survived without the cunning and wit of the woman that he's partnered with.
Yeah, they kind of play with that in the sequel too, although they give you that like big, I guess I'm spoiling this for anyone who's not seen it, but like there's the big twist with, oh my gosh, I just forgot the actress's name. She's in Sky High. She's like the final girl.
Oh yeah,
like the whole time.
Danielle Panabaker.
That's it. Thank you. And she gets it in like the last 4 minutes. You're like, wait a minute, what the hell? Like you can't kill the final girl,
right? Yeah. But
so let's get back to your pitch though. I love this talk, but I want to hear your idea.
So at the end of Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason is covered in chains by Tommy Jarvis, and he is thrown into the lake, and he sinks to the bottom of the lake. And we get the speech that says, like, Jason's still down there somewhere, and you get the close-up of his eye still open. Like, Jason is still alive in the bottom of that lake. And it isn't until Part 7 when Tina Shepard uses her psychic powers to remove Jason from the bottom of the lake, thinking that she's trying to wake up her dead father. And then, of course, at the end of 7, Jason gets thrown right back into the lake. That kind of becomes his, like, pull him out of the lake, throw him into the lake. Pull him out of the lake.
Sure.
The lake.
Yeah.
So
that's his cold storage.
Yes, absolutely is. And that is, you know what? That's going to be the title of my. Friday the 13th film. Thank you. You credit.
If you put me in the movie, please. That's all I ask.
Somewhere. My concept for a Friday film is it is set the winter after Tommy Jarvis threw Jason into the lake, and it's about the caretakers who are up there at it. It's by that point it's Forest Green. It gets renamed in Part 6, so it's Forest Green. And they're trying to do their best to figure out a way in which they can, get this place back on track. And they figure, let's spend the winter up here. Let's try to figure this out. And over the course of the winter, Jason is freed from the lake, the frozen crystal lake, and goes about murdering people in a big snowy wasteland. And we get snowy cabins, and we get snowy streets, and we get to finally see that hockey mask, that sport that is so perfectly attuned to the cold, finally out in the cold. And at the end of that film, of course, they're going to throw Jason right back in that lake because a year later, Tina Shepard has to get him out of that lake for the events of Part 7. So my film would be set in the 80s in between Part 6 and 7. And
so Friday 6.5.
It would be 6.5. Friday the 13th, cold storage. And that would be my dream.
I'm so glad you go to winter. Sorry, I cut you off. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's it. It would be literally my dream project. I would, if you told me I got to make that movie and I could never make another movie for the rest of my life, I would absolutely do it. It is my ultimate dream project.
No, I'm totally with you, and you can tell when you're talking about it how passionate you are. We also have like talked around like what it would be if we obviously, like I said, they're never going to ask us. Although I've like written things down as a writing exercise many a time. But I just like winter is such an obvious move for the camp, and like it's crazy to me that they never did. Like they put him in Manhattan, air quotes, before they put him in the snow, and I don't know if it's like a matter of it's way easier to shoot a film when it's nice out and you don't have to deal with all the factors of weather, and these were kind of cheap movies. But yeah, it's like such the great way to go. It's such the thing we haven't seen that would be so much fun. Plus, like you mentioned, hockey. Like I don't know, Jason with an ice skate doing something evil, Jason with a hockey stick doing something evil. So many great ideas.
Well, there's a hockey stick in this movie, in 2.
You're right. There is a hockey stick.
I was like, that seems like a weird little Easter egg for something they hadn't fully planned yet. That he used a hockey stick to build his little fort. I was like, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. One of the other things that you had mentioned you want to talk about, obviously we should talk about the Teds in these movies.
Yes.
I think it's fascinating that this Ted breaks one of the major slasher rules in that you're not supposed to drink alcohol, and yet he's saved by his drunkenness, which is unusual for a Friday movie.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. It's he like totally. He subverts the slasher rule and ends up living.
Because at one point when you see him in the bar, he's got like a dozen beer bottles in front of him, which like
and not
this bartender is not doing a great job, maybe.
No.
And not only is he smashed, but he's looking for an after party, and he's got like the horny look going on. So it's like
yes.
He wants to keep drinking and he wants to fuck. So it's like it's like every single one of these rules. Yes. So 100%. It's a strange scenario because like I love the character of Ted. I think he's the classic like camp goofball. And the whole opening, you know, like welcome to God's country. Like he's this complete dweeb who goes out there, hangs out with everybody, hangs out with all the cool kids, wants to spend the night out at the bar just getting tanked while everybody goes back and gets murdered. I can only imagine the rest of Ted's life must be a living nightmare. like I mean, honest to God, it's one of those like finding out that the plane that you were supposed to get on crashed, but like you were too busy partying the night before and you missed your flight. Like it's absolutely that scenario. So
well, he's also got to be like, drinking saved my life, so I'm just going to drink every day for the rest of my life.
No doubt that grown-up Ted is a horrible, horrible alcoholic and a miserable, miserable man.
I hope that there is a period in between those two things, though, where he's smart enough to like contact Heineken and be like, literally, your beer saved my life. I'm pretty sure they're drinking Heineken. Where he contacts them and is like, hey, I have a great ad campaign for you. It's that your beer literally saved my life.
Yep.
And it's just like Ted in a bar, like holding a machete and looking at it terrified.
Yep. Oh, and I also think about like Ted, the whole part where you know, Paul's telling the story, you know, I'm going to give it to you straight about Jason, and he tells the whole story, and at the end of that sequence, Ted jumps out with the mask on, and he's holding the spear, you know, and scares everybody. You know, he does the and they all scream.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, Ted brought that spear to camp, and I'm sure the police later told him they were like, hey, just so you know, Ted.
Oh no!
The spear that you brought to camp, a dude found it and he impaled your two friends with it,
like together in one pile.
They were kebabed.
You know those two sweetheart kids? They were the youngest kids at camp. Remember them? They were 17. Yeah.
That's a delight. I hadn't thought of that angle.
I didn't put. That's a great thing to think about.
Yeah. So, yeah.
The other one that you mentioned we wanted to talk about was Tom McBride, who is portraying Mark Jarvis, but not related to Tommy, from what I can tell.
Right? No, I don't think there's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Well, very famous.
Two Teds, two Jarvises.
Yeah. Well, very famously, fans added names to the vast majority of Friday the 13th characters that they never had.
Okay. Because I didn't catch a last name for this character in the movie.
There's virtually no last names for any characters, like any across the board. So when you look on Wikipedia and you start seeing all these people they each have a last name, it's like, no, that's not really like. They at some point they became like accepted, but the vast majority of them absolutely were not originally. They're not in the scripts. As somebody who owns all the scripts, they're not in.
Oh, okay.
Not in production material. Like it's something that was added later. I mean, yeah, it's not a thing. I mean, even the whole thing of like Sandra Dyer from the second film who gets killed. You know, it's her brother is the one who shows up in part 4 to try to kill Jason. and he ends up getting killed. You know, he's the woodsman who shows up and teams up with Tommy Jarvis in part 4, and then ultimately gets killed in the basement screaming, "He's killing me! He's killing me!"
Oh yeah.
Yeah, right. That's hilarious.
If you recall, he says he's like, yeah, I'm here because this lunatic killed my sister. Like that was like 4 days earlier. Jason killed his sister in part 2. And so they kind of retconned her, and they're like Sandra Dyer because his name is Rob Dyer in part 4. But she didn't have the last name Dyer in part 2. They just threw that on there, you know? So.
Right.
Yeah. So
one of the things I think is really cool about Tom's character in this movie, and I like low bar, I suppose, but for a movie made when it's made, the character being in a wheelchair doesn't like, he's not sort of this,
Punchline.
After school, not a punchline, and he is also not like an after school special, which is like what you might think would end up happening with a disabled character in a movie in the 80s. And I also really like that he's like a normal sexual human being, and he's flirting with this woman, and they're like a part of it while their big interaction is like her very aggressively coming on to him, and him.
She's like, "Yo, I want the D."
Yeah.
No, she is. Vicky is thirsty. Yeah.
She like points to this. She's like, "Hey, look at the sky," and she hired a skywriter to be like, "Fuck me."
Yeah, but I think that's like genuinely kind of surprising for a Friday the 13th movie from, what is that, 81, 82 when this came out?
81.
Like it's like not what I expected of this character. And he eventually does get it in a way that kind of uses the wheelchair as a punchline.
Weirdly hilarious death.
Yeah. But like I was genuinely surprised. Like this is a kind of a wild thing that they do in this movie.
Absolutely. So my whole thing is I never made the connection between me, you know, liking that character a lot and the fact that my own father was a quadriplegic. So I was around someone who was in a wheelchair all the time, and I didn't notice. It was my father was in a wheelchair before I was born, so it would have been weird to see him walk. And so for me, the idea of this character in this wheelchair, I didn't even think he was any different than any other character in that film. When I first saw that movie, you know, at age 13, I was just like, and then there's this dude. Like, and I'm like, of course he's going to have sex with that girl. Like my parents had sex. That's where I came from.
Sure.
Like, you know, like,
yeah.
I know that's perfectly feasible. So for me, it wasn't until later that I realized just kind of how progressive that was to have this character and really like play up the fact that he's a totally normal dude, and he's like yeah I'm just, you know, like he's just like, I'm working at a camp in the summer, you know, like he's not letting the fact that like he's in a wheelchair prevent him from being a camp counselor, which theoretically would be like being in a wheelchair be hugely detrimental to being in the woods. Like
yeah, absolutely.
I can tell you, like as a kid with a dad in a wheelchair, like we went camping all the time, and most of the time my dad was like, I can't get over there, I can't go there, I can't get, like the fact that this dude's like, yeah, let's be a camp counselor. Like, it'll be tough as shit, but I'm going to do it. Like, and we also know that he's strong because he repeatedly states, he's like, yeah, I got in an accident. He's like, yeah, the doctors say it's permanent. I don't think it is. I'm going to fight it. Like, it's very common for a lot of people who become paralyzed to be like, they accept their fate very quickly, including my own father, you know, like, and under most circumstances, I think it's important to accept one's fate when you've had a like incredibly traumatic spinal cord injury. You're not going to walk again. And later in life, when I watched Friday 2, and he's like, the doctors say it's permanent, but I don't. And I'm kind of like, you should listen to those doctors. Because yes, fight it, be a badass, keep going for it. But like, if a doctor tells you that a spinal cord injury is going to keep you in a wheelchair for life, science pretty much guarantees that you're going to be in that wheelchair for life.
Right.
Yeah.
As the child of a quadriplegic, I feel very okay in saying that. That said,
yeah,
I like his character a lot. I always found him very endearing. And then once I started learning a little bit more about the series and doing deep dives into who all the actors were and where they all came from, Tom McBride, who plays Mark in that film, is a really amazing human in and of his own right. So he was a model. He had gotten the role in Friday 2. He was cast very early on because he was super handsome. He got the role of Mark in the wheelchair, and he was at that time and for his whole life, he was openly gay. And this was, this film was shot in 1980 during a time when, of course, yes, there's sexual revolutions going on at all times, late 70s, early 80s. Absolutely, that was happening. And, to be a part of, gay culture, like that's absolutely, there were gay bars, there were gay communities, obviously, in the early 80s, but it was very hard for people who were openly gay to get roles in films because it was just, there was still that stigma. And Tom McBride, he had come from West Virginia, a place where even to this day is not really that opening to gay folk, but
No, yes, no.
but the fact that he decided to come out and managed to create a career as a model and then parlay that into very few acting roles. He did very little acting. He'd always dreamt of becoming a big star, and he wanted to be somebody who was an iconic gay actor because the world needed more of those. He thought, I think
Totally.
everyone agrees. He ended up, the film was a huge hit, but it didn't really lead to many more acting roles because, again, he was very open about the fact that he was gay, and that did set him back a lot. He had like a small role in Remo Williams. He was on some TV shows. I think he only did like one TV show actually, but like he didn't do a whole lot of acting. He tried to get back into modeling. He did a bit of modeling, and then he did a little Broadway work. But unfortunately, he contracted HIV and it turned into AIDS, and he died of AIDS in the mid '90s. And one of the things that I think is so shocking about Tom McBride is a friend of his, this documentary filmmaker named Jay Corcoran, actually, when Tom found out that he had AIDS, he reached out to Jay and he said, I'd always wanted to be an actor. I'd always wanted to be in movies, and I'm going to die, and I'm never going to achieve that. And I'd really like to capture my final moments, my final years on film, because that's always been something that I've been drawn to. I've always wanted to be a part of film. And this Jay Corcoran was like, that's a big ask, and ultimately he agreed to do it. And Jay made a film. It's rather short. It's only about an hour long. It's called Life and Death on the A-List. And it follows Tom McBride as his body breaks down and ultimately he dies, and you see him die in the film. They're there
Wow.
with him. They're there with him when he passes away. And it is a powerhouse, just gut punch of a film about how grossly mismanaged the AIDS crisis was in 1995 and how wonderful a human this guy was, and what a sad experience that this life was lost to this disease that we can't necessarily say was preventable, but was grossly mismanaged. It's a really powerful film. It's really hard to watch. I
can imagine.
I believe it was only released on VHS, but I know that you can find it online. Like there are like, I won't say
rips or whatever.
Like there are rips of it. It's pretty available. I think that if you just Google Life and Death on the A-List, you can see it. I don't normally say, steal this thing, but I believe the only way to watch it is on VHS. I don't believe there is a legal way to see the film anymore. And if anyone out there does want to see Tom McBride, who is Mark in Friday 2, and he's a phenomenal actor, and he's seemed to be an amazing human, to see this really powerful story about the end of his life, I think it absolutely warrants tracking it down and watching it through these means if it means anything to anyone. And as someone who's constantly fighting for LGBTQ rights, I think that this is a film that deserves rediscovery and deserves more people to see.
Yeah, if we can find a link,
Totally.
I'll attach it when we post this. But yeah, that's I had read about the documentary, but I have obviously not seen it yet. So
Same.
Yeah,
Like I said,
I'm glad you
it's
shared.
very heavy, and it's not something. It's very triggering. It's very difficult, and I mean, I have no better word to use than it's rather unpleasant. But
Okay.
it's very important, and it is made with a lot of passion. It's just I think it's something that make sure that you're in the right headspace when you want to watch it. I've told people that I think it's a very important documentary to watch during Pride, when you're learning more about the history of LGBTQ rights in America. I think it's a very powerful hour to spend during that time of year. But any time of year should be Pride. So any time of year that anyone feels up to watching it, they should.
Yeah, well, thank you for
Thanks for that.
Yeah, appreciate it. There's just no way to transition from a big subject like that to a little more lighthearted. So I'm just going to just plow through this. But the one thing about his character that I did find a little disappointing on the rewatch is we sort of have this running gag of Chekhov's blank. Obviously, everybody knows what Chekhov's gun is, but in this movie, I felt like his character sort of has Chekhov's upper body strength because they're constantly show him like arm wrestling everybody and just like people are trying to use two hands and he's still beating them.
Yeah.
Which is more to what we were talking about before of like being sort of progressive about having a character in a wheelchair in the 80s that he like, yeah, of course his arms are really strong. That's how he gets around. I wanted him to do something with that in fighting Jason. Like, obviously, he's going to lose, but I was disappointed that there wasn't a moment where like that upper body strength being, this jacked man comes into the play before Jason gets him. Because it's very unceremonious. He like goes outside looking for the gal that he was supposed to bed down with for the night and then suddenly gets hit with the machete. Yeah. So that was my one little like, I really wanted to see him have like a little, tussle or something.
Yeah. Well, in the second film, I think that one of the things that we see in that film is that Jason he's not the killing machine that we later know him as, in so much as he tries to catch people by surprise in the second film.
Yeah, for sure.
Regularly tries to like wait until their back is turned to take them down. The only people that he really goes like up against are women, and we see that throughout the film. The character, his name's escaping me right now, who gets caught in the bear trap and gets flipped upside down. Like Jason's able to just walk.
Scotty.
Yes, thank you. Jason's able to just walk right up to him and butcher him because he's incapacitated. Yet,
sure.
Yet the woman who finds him, he approaches her as she looks up and screams, which implies that she could fight back. Similarly, the woman, Vicky? Yeah, Vicky, who wants to hook up with Mark, when she gets hers, similarly, she finds the dead couple, and then, Jason shows up and, actually taunts her, walks toward her very slowly, with the knife out. And he never does that to any of the men in the film. With the men in the film, he catches them off guard.
Yeah, he sets up a Sarah Jessica Parker and Hocus Pocus moment for her, where he's hiding under the covers to pop out and scare her.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very so. Yeah, no, I think that in that film, there's Jason knows Mark's upper body strength. He's not going to fuck him.
Sure.
He's going to wait until he's turning the other direction and just go whap. I mean. It's like that cop early in the film. I mean, he just straight up walks up behind that cop.
Oh, yeah.
Hits him in the back of the head with a hammer claw.
Yeah.
That's Jason's MO in the movie. And that changes as he becomes more confident as a killing machine.
Right. And more supernatural.
Yes, obviously.
Totally.
Yeah.
By 6, he's just doing whatever the hell he wants.
Right. Basically teleporting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, this has been a blast, and will certainly be the longest episode of our show ever by the time we put everything together in editing and add some pieces here. But I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and hang with us this morning, give up some of your time to talk about this really fun Friday movie. You want to plug some stuff, let people know where to find more of you and anything like that?
Sure, yeah. I'm pretty easily accessible on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at Ted Geoghegan. That's TEDGEOGHEGAN. Right now, as long as quarantine's holding up, every single Friday night I host an online horror trivia event called Final Exam Trivia. You can find that at Final Exam Trivia. That has hundreds of people playing every single Friday. You can play on any computer or mobile device. It's free, and we have cool prizes. I, over the course of this quarantine, I also created a radio program called This Is Not a Story About, where I do really deep dives, and I really obsess over forgotten cinema history. It's all sorts of cinema, everything from cartoon characters and martial arts stars to, the episode 5, episode 5 is actually about Friday the 13th. So it covers all bases there, and you can find that on basically any platform that hosts radio shows or podcasts. Again, that's called This Is Not a Story About. And
I can vouch for that Friday the 13th episode. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. I always plug the episode 4 MGM. Listen to that one. That's the most heavily researched thing I've ever done in my entire life. It's a story that has literally never been told outside of that podcast. Bits and pieces of it have been told over the years. It was one of the biggest news stories the year that it occurred, but it has completely faded into obscurity. And it's a story that I am so passionate about that by the end of it, you can hear me crying. It's an amazing, amazing story, and I'm incredibly proud of that one. So if you get a chance, I'm proud of all 5 of them. Check them out.
I'm downloading it right now.
And I'll definitely check that one out.
Unlike your podcast, each episode is 22 minutes long. So,
so really
what
manageable.
Is this? Bite-sized and digestible. What an idea.
But that's what I'm up to. And, God willing, once the world starts spinning again, I might have a new movie for you sometime.
I look forward to it.
So.
And I hope that it's eventually that Frozen Friday the 13th one. I've always wanted to be a guy with a head bandage in a movie. So like if you need an extra with a head bandage, I'm not an actor, but I could be an extra with a head bandage. That's
I have an acting degree, so I have loftier. I'm like, I really want to be a final boy. Like after, I think once we covered Friday 2, I was like, I want to be a final boy so badly.
Nightmare 2.
You're right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. Well, thank you so very much for joining us.
This has been rad. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So much fun. I really enjoyed. You brought a scholarly take to our podcast that is not always there. So we really appreciate that very much.
You're very welcome. It's a lot of fun to do.
Thank you. I'm very, very happy to hear that. Thank you all so much for listening. I have been Trip Lano.
I am Ted Geoghegan.
And I will always be Andrew Lano.
Until next time.
Don't you forget about me.
Dissecting the 80s is a Chum Some of This production. Ow.